Welcome to the new and very improved, and at a very different time, in the hot seat. So if you've seen the show before, you know, we've been doing this now for quite a while, and we've decided this year to do a little shift in how we look at the hot seat and what we're putting in there. So rather than tossing people there, we're gonna do something a little different, and we're gonna take a look at all the exciting, very exciting news that comes out every week now on a minute by minute basis, and try to help understand what's true, what's not, what's hype, what's not. And so let's put a little bit of announcement and some vendors in the hot seat for this year. So welcome, and we hope to see you back. And by the way, the show is now weekly instead of bi-weekly, so you even get more opportunities to listen to us banter about the news. Okay? Thomas, I know you mentioned before the show that you had one that you wanted us to jump into, so why don't you lead off with it, and then we can add a few thoughts here and there.
Yeah, well, it's actually about one of my favorite enterprise titans. Microsoft.
You use that word titan loosely, don't you?
Well, if we are talking about one of the top 3 companies,
I guess if you're talking size, size matters. Then, okay, I get
it. That size matters, yeah. But else it's well quite loose. Yeah. So Microsoft, they last week, actually, not last year, last week made their E365 E7 suite. After it was E5, now E7 suite GA.
Keeps growing.
Frontier suite, which is quite some fun part actually, because what are they doing? They are bundling all sorts of stuff, giving it a new price tag, and want to hit service now probably. But there are still a couple of interesting things in there. So they are saying we now have a control plane for enterprise agents. Wow. Of course they do, but heck, for productivity suite, but not for enterprise software. But well, let's put that apart. I think Mike and Pete and Steve have something to say about that as well. The other one is probably more interesting because of this whole bundling in combination with the price reduction of the bundle. They probably have the hope that they are getting more sticky in, well, some parts of their software, which I hope doesn't come too mature or at the cost of revenue, because I would treat that as the invite for a good dose of renegotiation of my current terms and conditions.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think?
Thomas, you know, when I reacted to when I first saw this pretty much the way you just did, like, really? Huh? But there are a couple of things that jumped out as I thought about this more, because and one of them you mentioned really, and that's the pricing angle, right? That's actually really interesting because of all the SaaSocalypse talk we've had over the last 6 months too, right? So what's the right pricing model, and there's a you know, this ongoing argument about, well, what happens, you know, because we've had predictable per seats, and now you're telling us we got to pay this metered thing, and we don't know how to meter it, and we don't know what that is, and we can't budget for it, and you know, I've heard CFOs crying for months now. So I you know, that actually is interesting, and the only thing I couldn't tell in this, and I didn't, to be fair, I didn't dig into this much, but they don't mention consumption-based pricing at all, which means that they are staying with per seat pricing. It's very cheap per seat pricing, which kind of upstages this whole conversation, right? If you're going to have a major vendor go down the path of we're not doing this, then where does that leave everybody else that is in a position where they think they have to do this? And does that really give them an edge, even if perhaps the capabilities aren't necessarily on par with some of their competition?
I mean, the edge is their ubiquitousness.
Right.
What a clunky word.
But that's exactly what I was going to say, only better.
What?
Like Microsoft is playing a completely different game than product companies. Like, like I said, the first version of Harvard Graphics was better than the current version of PowerPoint. So they're not a great product company, but they are a financial engineering genius, right? And so if you're a fan of Crossing the Chasm as I am, there's this whole mainstream market thing, and that's what they care about. So they're not, in my mind, trying to build some better product, and Copilot is a perfect example of how they executed on that philosophy. But the financial engineering part, their goal is to just make sure that everybody's paying them $100 a month or whatever the next price tag will be on Earth. That's the model.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting if you think about it, because it does mean that you're creating a disruption with a less than perfect product. Some would say way less than perfect, and perhaps that's the model they've used forever. When I was at Autodesk years ago, we used to say we were really good at fast following, which is a very interesting business model and has played well for Autodesk through all these years. But I'm not sure what you'd call Microsoft's model then, because they certainly aren't fast. They are definitely sort of following, or maybe they just lead in a different direction. I'm not sure. But
it seems to me like what they're doing is following a model you see from some small companies, which is get it out there even if it's bad, and then get feedback and modify it, except they're not a small company.
Well, and theoretically,
they don't care much about feedback.
Well, that actually is the real issue. But theoretically, right, the idea of an MVP and get it out there, get it tested, improve the product over time, that they're missing the key component of that, of improving the product over time.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I mean,
probably the V
right.
as well, the MV, the minimum viable.
Minimum viable. Now that part I think probably does apply and has for years for some of the products.
So just back to my thought was that I think this is really a financial engineering.
It's a business
announcement,
model.
not anything else.
Yeah, clear business model move there, I think. But so there's another piece of this though that I want us to dig into for just a minute, because the more I thought about this, and you guys know this year I've been talking a lot about the fact that governance needs to be built into all these platforms. In fact, it's the absolute biggest risk that any company that's doing agentic AI today has, and they don't know it. Because we're still trying to do governance the way we've always done it, which is slap it on the back end once you're done and use it as a way to go back and figure out what happened after the fact, which works great when it's at human speed. It does not work great when it's at machine speed, because the number of problems you can create in a tiny bit of time now has exponentially expanded. And yet we're still trying to govern things in a flashlight mode of looking backwards, and that just doesn't work, right? So when I looked at this, I went, here's the interesting play for them, and this is a problem. You look at all the enterprise players today, none of them, some of them are talking about governance finally, but none of them have built a governance layer that actually solves the problem. They have.
Well, you mentioned the FDA approach in the newsletter. The administration was talking about approaching these AIs the way FDA approaches a drug. But I mean, half the problem with the FDA is that a lot of the testing is done with the drug companies themselves. Where are
You're saying
where
they
are they
might
finding the
manipulate
experts?
the results? Come on, Steve. Are you really that? No, come on. They can't be doing that.
It's a proven thing. The FAA does the same.
Well, now they got caught in that one, though. Unfortunately, the Boeing incident kind of, perhaps changed that behavior a bit. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problem is always there, and that's if you want to find somebody to regulate railroads, probably the person who knows the railroads best works for the railroads. So you end up hiring them. We're dealing with the same thing here with AI, and that is, if you're going to get experts in AI, you need to go to the industry where they're building AI, and you bring them in. And well,
That's fair.
might they be biased in favor of the company they used to work for?
I don't understand where you're going with that, really. I mean, no. But here's the key to this, I think, and like I said, as I looked at this more, I realized that this could really be an underlying play that is very effective, and that is, can you really get in and establish this governance layer at in a way that really does solve the problem? Now, I haven't looked at what they've done here, and as we've all attested to the fact that sometimes their products don't necessarily live up to what they've said. I don't, maybe. And so maybe this is moot in that perspective, because maybe what happens is it still fails, and we still have the backlash. But I really think there's a backlash coming this year, because again, companies are going at this at a very, very dangerous way. The risk is extremely high and not very well understood. And it's particularly true around something that they put into this, and that is identity and conflict resolution. Now, that's a part of governance that almost nobody's really talking about right now, but it's the absolute most critical piece of it. And it's not something that lives inside of one environment, which is also part of the problem, and maybe a part of the problem with their announcement too, is that you can know identity of agents as long as they're in the same platform, because they're on the same platform. So they can see the metadata. There's no real need for other identity and permissions. But what happens when you cross boundaries, either application boundaries or organizational boundaries? Then you've got a serious issue, right? Because if I'm a commerce bot and I'm going out to buy a bunch of supplies, how does my supplier know if my commerce bot has the authority to spend $10,000 or $10 million? It doesn't.
Here's the rub. That's, of course, the only angle that Microsoft has to get into an AI governance control plane, which is coming via, identity and productivity.
Exactly.
In contrast to a ServiceNow, which are coming via the workflow, or a Google that comes in it via, partnerships, because they all have zilch. Yeah. Now, the challenge that we should all have with Microsoft in that instance is how good are they at governing themselves? I mean, how good are they at safety and security? Because there are bunches of breaches, of high-level breaches that come to mind that are just pushed under the rug as well.
Right. We look at it from the standpoint of the bill of materials for defense companies, and with supply chains that extend out. And you look at it as this cybersecurity problem, and it really resembles that problem in some ways. And that is, and down the supply chain, how do I know? One, if I'm the principal, how do I know what's going on down the supply chain? If I'm down the supply chain, how do I know that that's really the principal's agent coming in? That's
the problem, right? I mean, that is really and truly one of the biggest risks that companies are going to have now. And so, which makes me say that this intra-agent ID is in fact a real architectural advance. I mean, assuming it works, but even assuming it doesn't work, the idea is still an advance, right? And so treating agents as governed identities, policy, life cycle, audit, those are the right things. That is in fact where the problem sits today in the enterprise, that the unknown problem, right?
Which is what the other ones are covering as well. And
to some extent.
Not to quite an extent. What they do not.
Pieces.
I mean, look at your example. What you said is you don't know whether the bot or agent has the authority to spend 10 billion or 10 million. Right. Now, this is not an identity question. That's a role question, which is governed pretty well within SAP, for example, or in Oracle, or Salesforce. So what is not covered by any of them, and this is where Microsoft probably really has an angle, is this bot? Is this bot the Michael bot, or is it the Thomas bot?
Well, It
So
is an identity problem, though, Thomas.
and
That is, in
that
fact,
makes,
the identity,
that
right?
makes
Because
but that's the real problem.
right,
So it is
role and identity are linked, right? That's
Mhm.
actually how you determine I have the authorization, the authority to do a thing, right? Responsibility, authority, etc. So that's actually where those other issues fall down inside their own environment. The agent, the identity issues are solved because it's inherent in the platform.
Right.
But when you move outside of that, and you especially if you cross org boundaries, it gets really complicated. And the rest of that is the other thing I said was missing, which is still missing, is the conflict resolution piece of it. What happens if you're a bot and I'm a bot and we're across an organizational boundary and I say I can spend $10 billion and you go, look, I'm looking at you and you don't have that authority. And I'm like, no, I do. Who solves that question?
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the issues in the supply chain part of this. And it's constant because the major organizations who are going to be using this stuff, they're going to be the first users of this, are the ones with the complex supply chains, but they have deliberately, for a lot of reasons, separated themselves, i.e. they're not integrated vertically. Backward vertical they don't have backward vertical integration because they don't want to take the risks for employees in Vietnam or whatever. So now, how secure and how well is the supplier using this stuff? And you don't know that.
No, you don't. You don't. And even just establishing those today across the boundaries, it is really, it's an issue. And if I look at this, I go, the bundling piece, the pricing piece, that is actually a really interesting tactic. And getting out there quickly with it in their own environment. Yes, I mean, to me, that is actually pretty smart move in the environment we're in today. Now, can they sustain that long term and maintain margins? I don't think so. But again, they don't need to. No, they don't need to, right? Because again, first mover. But the underlying piece of that is exactly that issue around the governance plane. And are they, if this works, if this is true, it is a unique thing, and it could actually it could be a moat that we haven't really thought about today.
Well, one of the things too is how many layers of governance do there need to be? Because
yeah,
and one of the things we see is adding more layers of governance to some degree creates more compliance and less judgment. I.e., we follow the rules. Something screwed up, big deal.
Well, yes, but but in the agent world, it's kind of a different take, right? So in the human world, we follow the rules. Sometimes people don't follow the rules; they get in trouble. Okay, there's a whole method to this, right? And looking back, I can figure out who didn't do what they were supposed to do based on the logs, based on the whatever. But when it's an agent, there's a problem with that. We already talked about that, right?
Yeah.
So if that's true, then if you get to and can solve this issue very completely, and it is a complete problem, and that's a part of the reason why I say the other approaches are fragmented, because they don't actually look at every bit of this, including what I call the agent service bus, the ability for all these things to work together and have identity and have authority and know its authority and all that stuff, right? So that part is the uniqueness that could be right if it is true. And again, I don't know that, but I do think that's a really interesting and different play, and something that signals perhaps a growing awareness around this hole and risk that I've been yelling about into the void.
I mean,
all right, can we switch topics, please?
No.
There's only so many minutes a day I can talk about Microsoft.
Okay.
What
Why don't we talk about Anthropic then? Because that'd be an interesting conversation, wouldn't it?
Maybe we answer the question that came in.
Oh, do we have a question? I was talking and not listening.
Well,
everything had to manage conflicts and agent decision. My POV is that we define the lanes for agents which don't interfere if necessary. But so I agree. Defining the lanes for agents which don't interfere, and then but I think inside of an environment, whether it's an organization or inside of a platform, you can come up with rules that'll help you resolve those. right? Because it's just like a human to human conflict. There are rules. Now, it may be escalate to the boss, but that's okay, because that could be the case in the agent to agent too, right? Escalate to the agent boss or escalate to the human boss. That's fine. Those do get to resolution. They may not be fast enough in some cases, and that may be another issue, but that's an auxiliary issue, right? But I think when you start doing cross boundary, it is a significant one to have a very clear. I almost sort of think of it like agents need a passport that has all the metadata and everything that's about them, right? Who are they? Where'd they come from? Who do they represent? What's their authority? How much can they spend? How much can they not spend? Where, what are those boundaries?
Finally, a useful blockchain application.
There you go. That would be a good use of a block. That's fair. Finally,
Yeah.
I mean, after all these years. No, so I mean, great question. I think that is going to be the issue. It's a multi-layer problem when you start to talk about identity and authority when you move beyond some boundaries, and that I think we haven't really gained yet an understanding. And unfortunately, I'm afraid failure is the way we're going to learn the way this works. But that's a different issue.
Well, I mean, I think you touched on one of those critical issues earlier, and that is the difference in human versus machine speeds. And does that mean that just means we can make so many mistakes so much faster?
Well, you can, and I mean, in customer service, it means I can make a lot more customers angry in a much shorter period of time. Good, I guess. I don't know. So I mean, it is at scale. No, but anyway, so let's. Good question, and I really appreciate that, and it is, and this is something we're going to hit in this show repeatedly over this year, I think, because we're going to have some headlines that are going to be oops, and we'll get to talk about that too. But I'm curious of what you guys think about this Anthropic thing, because obviously we know the frontier models, the open AIs and Anthropics of the world are also trying to make a play for the enterprise that's different. It's the horizontal agent approach, it's the platform approach, and they certainly do come at it from a very different angle with very different value propositions. And before, when it was simply a platform and you had to build anything that you wanted, that still is a limitation, right? Because if you're starting to ship agents that are pretty much out of the box for applications like Oracle's doing, for example, then that it is much easier for most of their customers to just adopt their own version of it and go on. But if Anthropic starts to ship or OpenAI starts to ship agents that are in fact mostly available out of the box, require very little configuration, that actually then is a threat and does sort of change the competitive dynamics a bit, or at least I think they would. What do you guys think about that?
No.
Let's have Pete say something. He's looking bored.
It does look like he wants to say something.
Hey, it's smiling.
I've been fighting it the entire time. So I took one of these announcements from Anthropic, I think it's called.
Anthropic, yeah.
Yeah, Anthropic. I thought we had yet another one. I'm like, oh God, not another one. So there's this, one of the problems is that these plugins that they announce, they're plugging it into something that I think it should sort of be the other way around. So if you've got sort of a context layer as the core of what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then you leverage generative AI and agentic AI and whatever to do whatever, that's the sort of the important piece of it, because it's got the persistence that you need and all of that sort of the knowledge graphs that can emerge. And so all that whole sort of persistence layer that we were sort of just talking about before, that being the core, I think, is a better architecture for businesses, because every business is unique. And if you're so I ran through if I was to build a website using the plugin that Anthropic came out with for that, it's essentially the conversation ended in, well, everybody's going to have the same website. Like, you could use us in a mode where, your creativity, your personality could come through, but that's going to be a ton of work as compared to following our stated methods and us producing something for you. So there's this sort of drive to sameness, I think, that we've mentioned in previous podcasts.
Yeah, but if that's a problem, Pete, it would be a problem for the enterprise vendors too, right? Because they're also prepackaging agents inside of the applications. So my point is that coming at this from a different angle, when it's harder, that does, sort of limit some of that competitiveness from OpenAI and Anthropic. But when they come at it from a different place where they're saying this is prepackaged, this is something that you can do easily, it is no code, it is, all those things, and they've solved the context and knowledge layer, which I would argue Anthropic has, and I certainly use it that way, then, it starts to get to a different place, right? Because the competitive advantage for those enterprise players is we own the business logic, and that's still true. But if they don't also actually already own that account, so in accounts where, they're not a dedicated Oracle shop, then why wouldn't they? Maybe it is cheaper to just go down the road of Anthropic or OpenAI. And those guys have been worried about the competition for a while, certainly. But it didn't seem as credible in my mind because of the fact that there is so much infrastructure underneath that around business logic, data access, context. And yet we're starting to see that erode in those frontier models.
And it seems like when we've already got the environment, that's going to give advantage to people who already have that market penetration, i.e. SAPs and Oracle are going to have advantages simply because they already have a bunch of customers.
Well, that would be my argument, is not necessarily because they have a bunch of customers, but because a bunch of customers don't want to spend money to rip out something that works and replace it with something else that doesn't work yet. And the other piece of that is the business logic argument, right? So that business logic is a missing piece when you come at this simply from a agentic platform. You have to recreate that logic because that's how applications work today. And they still have to do that somewhere in the stack, even if it isn't at the UI level anymore. It drops down to somewhere in the basement. That's fine, but it still has to be there. And if you get to a point where that's easily recreated in any of the solutions, then it's going to become a price war or some other way of thinking about it that does create competitive dynamics that aren't there or haven't been there. Or at least were moats for the enterprise vendors that maybe erode. That was my point.
Out of curiosity, are the enterprise versions of these things going to be like the personal version of Microsoft 365 and just simply make it more annoying?
I don't think that you should compare Anthropic to Microsoft models. No, so the closest ones that probably, the ones that come closest to Anthropic's models are OpenAI's.
Yeah, that is absolutely right, and they're certainly the biggest competitor there. Yeah,
and looking at what they are doing, so they are playing a smart verticalization game. Anthropic, I mean. Yeah, so actually they invented this game from a model vendor perspective. Or maybe there has been a forgotten German one before that got pushed into verticals. But the real interesting part to me is the combination of industry, vertical, and trying to get into reach, which is the combination with the Microsoft infrastructure. That's what's making it really interesting, because as you are saying, the SAPs and Oracles of this planet, they likely already have something that is built in. I mean, SAP just bought Prior Labs, so in order to get the financial modeling really under control. And this brings me to the question I had with the doubt I have with Anthropic's approach here. So if there is a large language model underneath it, it's probably the hammer that is used on a screw. So it means that it's not necessarily the right tool that is on top of it.
Well, but every agentic system runs with a language model associated, and in a lot of but in a lot
run on tabular models, right? So
no, I mean there's
probably
still
needs a combination.
Yeah, at times, yes, but there's always still an associated model, and so I think that's part of what they're betting on, is that they've got the best functioning model, then you're gonna go towards a solution. If it's easy, if it's hard, then that's friction that I don't know how you overcome easily. And that's been my argument for Oracle. Their advantage there, owning the business logic, having the data layer, already having figured out ways to get the data into usable pieces. I don't disagree with that, and particularly around the business logic, because I do think that's a moat. But I wonder if you start to erode that by solving some of those issues up front and making it easier, especially for companies that aren't necessarily devoted to a specific platform already, then that does get to be an interesting risk. And maybe that pricing still ends up being part of the issue and creating friction because of the consumption-based model versus seat models and all those other issues too, right? But I do still think it's an interesting shift to see them start to move to prepackaged more, because that does put them directly into competition to the moat that you see with the enterprise.
I think they are the most credible ones too, of all the vendors that I know.
Oh, Anthropic by far. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm a big fan from what do I do with the agents and how do I use the agents in my business, and I get this from a lot of clients too when I talk to them. Right, it is they've definitely gone down the enterprise path in a different way from OpenAI and some of the others. Right?
Just don't trust them with deluge coding.
That's a different issue. That's a different issue. Anyway, all right. Well, so we got to two questions today. I mean, two headlines today. That's better than last week, I think. Right. So anyway, thanks everyone for joining today. Really, this is hopefully get a lot out of this show, and we're going to be bringing some really interesting issues forward as we go through this and trying to stay current, which of course is a burden unto itself, since the news changes every few minutes. But anyway, join us next week, same time, and we'll put some other interesting headlines in the hot seat and roast them for you for your edification.